You can find in the internet a lot of articles and videos how to improve your code or how to write better code, but nobody is talking about rules to avoid real pitfalls, like for example being fired or getting lower salary or just having more overtimes. Rule number 1 is you need always to be cautious and always check everything twice. And you can find in the internet a lot of stories that people were simply fired from the companies on the first or the second day after deleting production database. And actually it can happen with anybody. So you simply set up your machine or you are running tests or something else and you don't really know project deeply. And you simply use some credentials which were written in the default file, like for example a file with example of credentials. And actually you simply run the command and then you accidentally dropped staging or production database. And normally, of course, it's not your fault, but the setup of the project or the company, but actually in the company nobody cares. Normally you would be fired when it's happening because they simply need to find somebody who caused this problem. And it is even worse if they didn't make any backups and then production is completely broken. This is why I highly recommend you to be extremely cautious. You always need to check what commands are you running, with what credentials, what you have inside. If you see some keys on your local machine with word prod or production inside, you should never use them. This can lead you in a big mess. And actually the story of my own experience, simply after cloning a project and running tests, I removed completely staging database in the company. And it was happening because by default inside tests there were stage credentials inside, so it can happen with anybody. And you need to apply exactly the same rule while you're working with Git, because actually every single merge, rebase or pushing with force will completely change your history or just break the history of your project. And if you don't have a backup and you can't revert this command, then you have a big problem. This is why you always need to be aware what you are doing with Git, and normally you want to avoid using destructive commands like for example pushing with force or using rebase. Which brings us to the next rule. You must do backups. For example, if we're talking about Git, you can simply copy your project fully with the Git repository inside. In this case, if you're making something wrong with Git, you can simply use your backup folder and just take the Git state from there. Exactly the same is applied to database, but it is even more important. If you are making some changes, especially on production database, you must do a backup. If you are testing on database some new migrations, I highly recommend you to do backup previously. And obviously, it's not enough to just do a backup, you really need to check that backup is valid and you can really restore it. In other case, you don't have a backup. The next rule is extremely important if you want to avoid overtimes. And actually in every single company you can see teams which are going at home on time, and you can see teams which constantly have overtimes. And actually it doesn't have anything with experience, but just with planning. You need to have special days when you are doing deployments. For example, you should never deploy your code on Fridays, before holidays, or just in an hour before demo. Because your code might be broken, you may have overtimes, or your demo must be postponed because you broke the code. And the same rule applies to the deployments in the evenings. You shouldn't deploy anything half of an hour before you are going home, because there is a chance that you won't go anywhere and you will sit there 2 or 3 hours trying to fix that bug on production. The next important rule is to plan realistically. You need to have a plan what your team and you in particular will do this week and today. In this case, you can always understand how much work needs to be done, and you need to be realistic with yourself and with the team. It doesn't make sense to plan too much if you really see that you won't do it on time. And it is always important to remember that delivering less is much better than delivering nothing. Which brings us to the next point. You must be crystal clear with yourself, your project manager and your team lead. You must just say at the beginning, I don't feel that I can do it in 1 week. In this case, you can from start increase time for the feature or just make a scope smaller. Also, you must always be in sync with your project manager and your team lead. Every single day, if you see that feature is not going as intended, you can't deliver it on time, or you have some obstacles, you need to sync this information with them. In this case, they are aware of the problems and they understand at what point you are. If you simply sit on one feature the whole week and nobody knows what you are doing at all, and then you just say, okay, I didn't do it on time and it is not finished and there is still quite a lot of stuff to do, then it is your fault and your problem. If you are in sync every single day, then everybody are aware of your progress and how much more time you need. So this is the best recommendation that I can give you. You must always be crystal clear. In this case, you won't have any misunderstandings. If you think that you are doing it not right, or maybe your project manager thought it differently, then it's better to talk about it before you are implementing it. So these were my 5 rules how to avoid pitfalls while programming. And actually, if you're interested how to spot the bad team or a bad company, make sure to check this video also.